The crimson dawn broke over the battlements of Valehorn Castle, painting the ancient stones with blood-red light that seemed prophetic of the horrors to come. Princess Zephyria Nightbane stood atop the highest tower, her obsidian armor gleaming despite the early hour, watching as the last of her kingdom's refugees disappeared into the protective embrace of the inner citadel. Her violet eyes, inherited from generations of warrior queens, scanned the horizon with the intensity of a predator awaiting its prey. The silence that hung over the land was unnatural, oppressive, broken only by the distant tolling of warning bells from the outlying villages. Captain Thaddeus Ironwill approached from behind, his heavy boots echoing against the stone floor with measured precision. His weathered face bore the scars of countless battles, but none had prepared him for what they now faced. "Your Highness," he began, his voice gravelly from years of barking orders across battlefields, "the eastern watchtowers report movement. Massive movement. The scouts estimate at least 10,000, creatures approaching from the dark moor wastes." Zephyria's grip tightened on the pommel of her ancestral blade, soulrend, a weapon forged in the dying breath of dragons and blessed by ancient magic. The sword hummed with barely contained power, as if sensing the approaching darkness. 10,000, she repeated, her voice carrying the steel of her bloodline. "And how many soldiers do we have left, Captain?" 300, my lady. Perhaps 50 more if we arm the castle staff." Thaddeus's admission hung heavy in the air between them. The mathematics of their situation was brutal and undeniable. For every defender, they would face over 30 of the shambling horrors that had consumed the neighboring kingdoms with inexorable hunger. The princess turned from the window, her midnight black hair flowing like liquid shadow down her armored shoulders. At 25, she had already proven herself in border skirmishes and diplomatic negotiations, but nothing in her royal education had prepared her for this. The Crimson Plague, as the court scholars had termed it, had swept across the continent like wildfire, transforming the living into ravenous undead abominations that knew neither fear nor mercy. "Has there been any word from Prince Draken?" she asked, though the hope in her voice was carefully controlled. Her younger brother had departed 3 weeks prior with half their army to seek aid from the Alliance of Northern Kingdoms. The silence since his departure spoke volumes about the fate that had likely befallen him and his men. Thaddeus shook his head grimly. "Nothing, Your Highness. The last raven arrived 8 days ago from the border of Thornwick. After that, he didn't need to finish." They both understood that the plague's spread had likely cut off all communication with the outside world. A commotion in the courtyard below drew their attention. Zephyria looked down to see her master-at-arms, Sir Caleth Stormborn, directing the final preparations of their defenses. Massive cauldrons of oil were being positioned along the walls, while archers checked their strings and counted their arrows with the grim efficiency of those who knew each shot must count. The princess noted how few arrows they had left, perhaps enough for one sustained assault before they would be reduced to sword and spear. "Captain," Zephyria said, her voice carrying the authority of generations of rulers, "gather the officers in the war room. We need to discuss our strategy." She paused, studying the approaching storm clouds that seemed to mirror the darkness creeping across their land. "And send word to the Crypt Keeper, Master Aldrich. If we're to face the undead, we'll need every advantage our ancestors left us." As Thaddeus departed to carry out her orders, Zephyria remained at the window, watching the last traces of normal life disappear from her kingdom. In the distance, she could see the first dark shapes emerging from the tree-line, shambling figures that had once been farmers, merchants, and children from the outlying settlements. The sight filled her with a cold rage that burned brighter than any forge fire. The time for mourning the old world had passed. Now came the time for war. The war room of Valehorn Castle had witnessed countless strategic meetings throughout its 800-year history, but never had its oak-paneled walls contained such desperate deliberations. Maps of the kingdom lay spread across the massive table, their edges weighted down with ancient tomes and flickering candles that cast dancing shadows across the faces of the assembled officers. Princess Zephyria stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding despite the overwhelming odds they faced. Master Aldrich, the castle's crypt keeper and scholar of ancient lore, had arrived with several leather-bound volumes under his arm. His pale complexion and silver hair gave him an otherworldly appearance that seemed fitting for their supernatural crisis. "Your Highness," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've been researching the texts left by your great-grandmother, Queen Morwen the Wise. There are references to similar plagues in our kingdom's distant past." Sir Caleth Stormborn leaned forward, her emerald eyes reflecting both curiosity and skepticism. As the youngest knight to ever achieve the rank of Master-at-Arms, she had built her reputation on practical warfare rather than scholarly pursuits. "With respect, Master Aldrich, ancient legends won't stop the creatures I saw consuming Lord Garrett's estate. I watched them tear through his guards like parchment." Zephyria raised her hand for silence, studying the crypt keeper's earnest expression. "What did you discover, Aldrich? Every piece of knowledge might save lives." The old scholar opened one of his volumes, revealing pages covered in illuminated script and disturbing illustrations. 3 centuries ago, during the reign of King Voran the Bold, a similar plague emerged from the Shadowlands to the east. The dead rose and consumed the living, just as now. But the plague was stopped, contained within a single province before it could spread further. Captain Thaddeus, who had been examining the defensive positions marked on the map, looked up with interest. "How was it stopped? What weapons did they use?" "Not weapons, Captain. At least, not conventional ones." Aldrich turned several pages, revealing an illustration of a figure in royal armor standing before a circle of standing stones. They used the ancient ritual circles, the ones built by the first kings when this land was young. These circles can channel and focus magical energy, but they require... He hesitated, glancing at the princess with obvious reluctance. "They require what?" Zephyria demanded, though a cold suspicion was already forming in her mind. "Royal blood, your highness. The bloodline that built this kingdom carries within it the power to activate the old magic. But the ritual is dangerous. Queen Morwen's texts speak of terrible costs for those who attempt it." The room fell silent except for the distant sounds of preparation echoing through the castle walls. Outside, the first reports were arriving from the outer scouts. The undead horde was less than 6 miles away and moving with terrifying purpose. Time was running short, and conventional defenses seemed increasingly futile against an enemy that felt no pain and knew no fear. Sir Valdris Grimthorn, the oldest of the gathered knights, spoke up from his position near the window. His face bore the marks of 40 years of warfare, and his voice carried the weight of hard-won experience. "Your Highness, even if this ritual could work, we still need to hold the walls long enough for you to reach the ancient circle. It's located in the center of the Whispering Woods, nearly 2 leagues from here." "The woods that are now overrun with those creatures," Caleth added grimly. "It would be a suicide mission just to reach the circle, let alone perform some untested ritual." Zephyria studied the map, tracing the route to the ancient circle with her finger. The path led directly through territory that the scouts reported as heavily infested with the undead. Yet as she considered their alternatives, the mathematics remained brutally simple: they could not win through conventional warfare. Their 300 defenders, no matter how skilled or brave, could not stand against 10,000 undead creatures that required no rest, felt no pain, and knew no fear. "Master Aldrich," she said finally, "how long would this ritual take to complete?" "According to the texts, the preparation requires several hours, but the actual casting..." He consulted his notes carefully. "Perhaps 30 minutes, assuming the practitioner survives the initial channeling." "And what exactly are these terrible costs you mentioned?" The crypt keeper's face grew even paler, if such a thing were possible. "The texts are unclear, your highness. They speak of prices paid in more than blood, of sacrifices that echo through generations. But..." He looked directly into her violet eyes. They also speak of victories that saved entire kingdoms from eternal darkness. Captain Thaddeus straightened to his full height, his decision clearly made. If Her Highness decides to attempt this ritual, she'll have an escort. I'll lead a strike force to clear the path and hold the circle while she works. As will I, added Sir Caliph, her hand moving instinctively to her sword hilt. If our princess is willing to risk everything for the kingdom, then her knights will stand beside her. Zephyria felt a warmth spread through her chest despite the cold fear that gripped her heart. These were more than soldiers or subjects, they were family, bound by loyalty and shared purpose. Whatever the cost of the ancient ritual, she would not face it alone. The thunderous sound of 10,000 feet shuffling across dead earth reached the castle walls like the rhythm of some monstrous heartbeat. Princess Zephyria stood on the battlements, watching as the undead horde crested the hill that marked the boundary of her family's lands. In the pale morning light, they appeared as a dark tide of humanity gone wrong, farmers still clutching rusted tools, merchants in tattered finery, children whose innocent faces now bore the vacant stare of the grave. At the front of the shambling mass walked something that had once been a man of noble bearing. His armor, though corroded and stained with things better left unidentified, bore the heraldry of Prince Draken Nightbane. Zephyria's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the distinctive dragon crest of her brother's personal guard. The creature that had been Prince Draken turned its hollow gaze toward the castle walls, and for a moment, she could have sworn she saw a flicker of recognition in those dead eyes. Archers to the walls! Captain Thaddeus bellowed, his voice carrying across the courtyard with practiced authority. Oil crews, prepare for my signal. The defenders moved with desperate efficiency, each person understanding that their kingdom's survival depended on every action taken in the coming hours. Sir Caliph appeared at Zephyria's side, her face grim as she studied the approaching horde. Your Highness, we've prepared the strike force as discussed. 20 of our best fighters, mounted and ready to escort you to the ritual circle. But looking at those numbers. She gestured toward the mass of undead that seemed to stretch to the horizon. I'm not certain we can clear a path through that. Master Aldrich climbed the stone steps to join them, carrying a leather satchel filled with ancient implements and rare components needed for the ritual. His scholarly face was pale but determined, and he moved with the careful precision of someone carrying precious cargo. Princess, I've prepared everything according to the texts. The ritual components, the incantations, the ceremonial blade that will be needed to complete the final requirements. Zephyria accepted the satchel, feeling the weight of both its physical contents and its terrible implications. Master Aldrich, I want you to remain here with the garrison. If the ritual fails, the castle will need every defender it can find. Captain Thaddeus will accompany my strike force as planned. My lady, Thaddeus interjected, perhaps you should reconsider. The texts speak of costs that could be interpreted many ways. There might be alternatives we haven't considered. The princess shook her head firmly, watching as the first ranks of undead reached the base of the castle walls. Already, she could hear the sickening sound of rotting hands clawing against stone, seeking purchase to begin their climb. Look at them, Captain. Look at what was once my brother leading that charge. There are no alternatives left to us. A horn blast from the eastern tower announced that the siege had truly begun. The undead, driven by some unholy intelligence, had split their forces to surround the entire castle. Ladders fashioned from human bones began to appear against the walls, while other creatures simply began climbing over their fallen companions, using the bodies as stepping stones toward the battlements. Oil. Release the oil. Thaddeus commanded. The defenders tipped their cauldrons, sending cascades of burning liquid down onto the climbing horrors. The undead caught fire immediately, but continued their ascent even as flames consumed their rotting flesh. The sight was both effective and horrifying. Dozens of creatures fell back to the ground, yet dozens more continued climbing through the flames and smoke. Sir Valdris Grimthorne's voice rang out from the southern wall, "They're breaking through the gate. The gate is failing." The massive wooden doors, reinforced with iron bands and blessed by generations of court priests, were splintering under the relentless assault of hundreds of undead creatures. Each blow sent visible cracks spreading through the ancient wood. Zephyria knew their time had run out. The strike force she had planned would need to depart immediately, or they would be trapped within the castle as it fell. She turned to face her assembled officers one final time, memorizing their faces and drawing strength from their unwavering loyalty. Sir Caliph, take command of the castle defenses. Hold them as long as possible, but do not throw lives away needlessly. If the walls fall before I can complete the ritual. She paused, meeting each of their gazes in turn. Retreat to the inner keep and make your final stand there. Let history remember that the Knights of Valehorn fought with honor until the end. Captain Thaddeus was already mounting his destrier, a magnificent black stallion that had carried him through countless battles. Around him, 19 other mounted warriors prepared for what they all knew would likely be their final charge. Their armor gleamed in the morning sun, polished to perfection for this last desperate gambit. The ritual circle lies 2 leagues northeast, Zephyria called out as she swung into her own saddle. Her destrier, Shadowstorm, stamped nervously as if sensing the supernatural evil that surrounded them. We ride hard and fast. Once we reach the circle, form a defensive perimeter. I'll need at least 30 minutes to complete the ritual. As if summoned by her words, a portion of the castle's main gate finally gave way with a thunderous crash. Undead creatures poured through the breach like water through a broken dam, their hollow moans echoing off the courtyard stones. The time for planning had ended. For Valehorn. Zephyria cried, drawing Soulrend from its sheath. The blade blazed with silver fire as it tasted the morning air. For Valehorn, her warriors responded in unison, spurring their mounts toward the growing chaos that awaited them beyond the walls. The thundering hooves of 20 destriers carved a path through the undead like a blade through silk, but the respite was momentary. Princess Zephyria led her strike force through the breach in the outer walls, Soulrend singing as it cleaved through rotting flesh and ancient bone. Behind them, the sounds of battle echoed from the castle walls as Sir Caliph and the remaining defenders fought desperately to buy them precious time. Captain Thaddeus rode at Zephyria's right flank, his massive war hammer crushing skulls with methodical precision. Each swing sent sprays of blackened blood across his armor, but he never slowed his pace. To their left, Sir Braylon Swiftblade lived up to his name, his twin sabers dancing in deadly arcs that severed limbs and heads with elegant brutality. The strike force moved like a spear thrust through the heart of the enemy, their formation tight and disciplined despite the horror surrounding them. The whispering woods loomed ahead, their ancient trees twisted into unnatural shapes by centuries of dark magic. Even before the plague, these woods had been a place of caution and whispered warnings. Now, they crawled with undead creatures that had once been travelers, hunters, and hermits who had sought shelter among the trees. The canopy above blocked out much of the daylight, creating a twilight realm where shadows moved with malevolent purpose. Stay close. Zephyria commanded as they plunged into the forest depths. The trees will break up their formations, but they'll also limit our mobility. Her voice carried clearly despite the chaos, trained from childhood to project authority even in the midst of battle. Sir Corvin Ironheart, riding near the rear of the formation, called out a warning, movement in the trees above us. They're in the branches. Indeed, undead creatures were dropping from the canopy like grotesque fruit, landing among the horses with bone-jarring impacts. One fell directly onto Sir Matthias Goldenheart's mount, causing the destrier to rear and throw its rider into the undergrowth. Without hesitation, Thaddeus wheeled his horse around, his warhammer catching the creature in the chest and sending it flying into a massive oak trunk. He reached down to pull Matthias back into his saddle, even as more undead emerged from behind every tree and boulder. This forest is a death trap, Your Highness. They're everywhere. Zephyria glanced at the ancient compass her master Aldrich had provided, its needle pointing steadily toward the ritual circle despite the supernatural energies that filled the woods. They were still over a league away from their destination, and already they had lost 2 horses and suffered multiple injuries among the strike force. At this rate, none of them would survive to reach the circle, let alone defend it during the ritual. There. She pointed toward a break in the trees where an old stone bridge crossed a narrow ravine. The ancient road. It will take us directly to the circle. The bridge was a remnant of the kingdom's earliest days, built by the same hands that had constructed the ritual circles throughout the land. If the old stories were true, creatures of darkness would find it difficult to cross running water, especially water that flowed beneath blessed stone. As they approached the bridge, the wisdom of her decision became apparent. The undead creatures pursuing them slowed noticeably as they neared the flowing stream, their movements becoming more labored and uncertain. Several actually collapsed at the water's edge, as if the blessed nature of the ancient crossing was anathema to their corrupted existence. But their relief was short-lived. As the strike force reached the center of the bridge, a new horror awaited them. Standing at the far end, blocking their passage, was a figure that made even the battle-hardened warriors pause in recognition and dread. Prince Draken Nightbane, or what had once been him, waited with supernatural patience. His royal armor was intact but stained with unspeakable corruption, and his once handsome face now bore the pallor and vacant stare of the grave. "Brother," Zephyria whispered, her heart breaking at the sight of what he had become. Even in undeath, Draken retained some echo of his former skills. He stood with the practiced stance of a master swordsman, and his hand rested on the pommel of his ancestral blade, Dawnbreaker. Captain Thaddeus moved his horse closer to the princess, his voice low and urgent. "My lady, we can't hesitate. Whatever that thing is, it's no longer your brother. It's just another obstacle between us and the ritual." Zephyria knew he was right, but the knowledge didn't make the task any easier. Draken had been more than her brother, he had been her closest friend, her trusted advisor, and the one person in the kingdom who had never treated her differently because of her royal blood. Now he stood before her as an enemy, and she would have to cut him down to save the very kingdom they had once sworn together to protect. "Form up behind me," she commanded, spurring Shadowstorm toward the far end of the bridge. "Whatever happens, don't stop. The ritual circle is less than half a league beyond this point." As they approached, the creature that had been Prince Draken drew Dawnbreaker from its sheath. The blade, once brilliant as its name suggested, now gleamed with an oily darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. When it spoke, its voice was a hollow echo of the warm tenor she remembered from their childhood. "Sister," it said, tilting its head with an unsettling mixture of recognition and alien hunger. "You cannot pass. You cannot escape what we have become. Join us, and the pain will end." Zephyria raised Soulrend, its silver fire blazing brighter in response to the darkness before them. "I'm sorry, Draken. I'm so very sorry." Then she charged, and the fate of kingdoms hung in the balance of their clash. The collision between Soulrend and Dawnbreaker sent shockwaves through the ancient bridge, causing the very stones to crack under the force of enchanted steel meeting corrupted metal. Princess Zephyria felt the impact reverberate through her entire body as she fought against what had once been her beloved brother. The creature wearing Prince Draken's face fought with all of his remembered skill, but corrupted by an intelligence that was utterly alien and malevolent. "You were always the better warrior," the thing that had been Draken hissed as their blades locked together, its breath carrying the stench of the grave. "But death has made me stronger, sister. Death has made me perfect." Behind them, Captain Thaddeus and the remaining strike force battled desperately against the undead creatures that had finally found the courage to cross the blessed bridge. The sacred nature of the crossing had slowed the creatures but not stopped them entirely, and now the narrow stone span had become a desperate battlefield with no room for retreat. Zephyria disengaged from the blade lock and spun away from her brother's counterattack, Soulrend leaving a silver trail in the air as it deflected his strike. "Whatever you are now, you're not my brother," she declared, channeling all her grief and rage into a devastating overhead cut that would have split any mortal opponent in half. But Draken was no longer mortal. He caught her blade on his crossguard and twisted, nearly wrenching Soulrend from her grip. His movements were faster than they had been in life, enhanced by the supernatural strength that animated his corpse. Yet there was something missing, the creativity and adaptability that had made him such a formidable opponent in their training matches were gone, replaced by a mechanical precision that followed predictable patterns. Sir Braylon Swiftblade cried out in pain as one of his twin sabers shattered against the hide of a particularly massive undead creature. The thing had once been a blacksmith, its arms still grotesquely swollen with muscle even in death. Captain Thaddeus wheeled his destrier around to assist, but they were rapidly being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. "Your Highness," Thaddeus called out between hammer blows. "We can't hold this position much longer. Whatever you're going to do, do it now." Zephyria knew he was right. The ritual circle lay just beyond the treeline at the far end of the bridge, but they would never reach it at this rate. She needed to end the fight with her brother quickly, but how could she bring herself to strike down the person she had loved most in all the world? The answer came as she looked into Draken's eyes and saw, for just a moment, a flicker of the brother she remembered. Behind the vacant stare of undeath, Prince Draken Nightbane was still trapped, still aware, still suffering. In that instant, she understood that killing this creature would not be murder, it would be mercy. "I love you, brother," she whispered, fainting left before driving Solren through his heart in a thrust that carried all her skill and sorrow. "I'm setting you free." The blade pierced the corrupted armor and sank deep into Draken's chest. For a moment, his face cleared entirely, and she saw recognition and gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he breathed, his voice once again the warm tenor she remembered. "Save them, Zephyria. Save everyone we couldn't." Then the light faded from his eyes, and Prince Draken Nightbane fell to the ancient stones of the bridge, finally at peace. Zephyria stood over his body for a heartbeat, tears streaming down her face, before the sounds of battle reminded her that there was no time for proper mourning. "The circle," she commanded, spurring Shadowstorm toward the treeline. "Everyone to the circle, now." The remaining members of the strike force, now reduced to barely a dozen riders, followed her lead, cutting through the last of the undead creatures blocking their path. The ritual circle lay in a clearing just beyond the edge of the Whispering Woods, its ancient stones worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain but still radiating a faint energy that made the air itself seem to hum with power. The circle consisted of 7 standing stones, each nearly twice the height of a man and covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift and move when viewed from the corner of one's eye. At the center of the circle stood a flat altar stone, its surface stained dark with the blood of ancient sacrifices. Master Aldrich's research had been thorough. This was indeed one of the original ritual sites, built by the first kings to channel and focus the magical energies that flowed through the land. Captain Thaddeus immediately began positioning the surviving warriors around the perimeter of the clearing. "Defensive positions. Watch the tree lean." His voice carried the authority of a man who had survived countless battles, but even he could not hide the exhaustion and desperation that tinged his words. Zephyria dismounted and approached the altar stone, removing the components Master Aldrich had prepared from her leather satchel. The ritual required specific arrangements of rare herbs, precious stones, and silver implements that had been blessed by generations of court priests. But according to the ancient texts, the most crucial component was her own royal blood, the bloodline that had built the kingdom and could, if the legends were true, command the very forces of life and death. "How long do you need, Your Highness?" asked Sir Corvin Ironheart, his voice tight with strain as he watched shadows moving between the trees. Zephyria consulted Master Aldrich's notes one final time, memorizing the incantations and gestures that would activate the ancient magic. 30 minutes to complete the full ritual. But once I begin, I cannot stop or start over. No matter what happens, you must hold this circle until I finish." As if summoned by her words, the first of the pursuing undead creatures emerged from the forest. Not just dozens this time, but hundreds, drawn by some supernatural intelligence that recognized the threat the ritual posed to their existence. At their head walked creatures that had once been knights and nobles, their armor marking them as members of Prince Draken's original expedition. The final battle was about to begin. The ancient incantations flowed from Princess Zephyria's lips like water from a sacred spring, each syllable carefully pronounced despite the chaos erupting around the ritual circle. The standing stones began to glow with a pale blue light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, and the very air crackled with energy that made her skin tingle and her hair stand on end. Behind her, the sounds of desperate combat filled the clearing as Captain Thaddeus and the remaining warriors fought to hold back the endless tide of undead creatures pouring from the whispering woods. Second wave incoming from the east. Sir Braylon called out, his voice strained as he parried the rusted blade of what had once been a merchant. His broken saber had been replaced with a war axe taken from a fallen comrade, and he wielded it with grim efficiency despite his obvious exhaustion. Zephyria forced herself to ignore the sounds of battle, focusing entirely on the complex ritual requirements. According to Master Aldrich's translations, she was now entering the most dangerous phase, the point where she would need to offer her own life force to power the ancient magic. The ceremonial dagger, its blade forged from meteoric iron and inscribed with runes older than the kingdom itself, felt cold and heavy in her hands. "Your Highness." Captain Thaddeus's urgent shout broke her concentration for a moment. "Something's wrong. They're not just attacking randomly anymore, they're coordinating, trying to break through at specific points." Indeed, the undead assault had taken on a new character. Instead of the mindless shambling advance they had displayed before, the creatures were now moving with tactical precision. Groups of them focused their attacks on individual defenders, attempting to overwhelm them through coordinated effort rather than simple numbers. It was as if some greater intelligence was directing their movements from afar. The princess resumed her chanting, but a growing sense of dread filled her heart. The ritual texts had warned of this possibility, that attempting to channel such powerful magic would draw the attention of the dark forces behind the plague itself. Whatever malevolent entity had created the undead curse was now fully aware of her efforts to stop it, and it was marshalling all its power to prevent the ritual's completion. Sir Corvin Ironheart's scream of pain echoed across the clearing as a creature with the rotting face of a court page sank its teeth into his sword arm. The brave knight's destrier reared and struck out with iron-shod hooves, crushing the undead thing's skull, but the damage was done. Corvin could barely lift his weapon, and dark veins were already spreading from the bite wound. The corruption spreads faster now, Master Aldrich had warned her during their preparations. The plague has grown stronger as it feeds, and a single bite can transform a healthy warrior in minutes rather than hours. Zephyria reached the critical juncture in the ritual, the point where she would need to shed her royal blood upon the altar stone to complete the activation of the ancient magic. The ceremonial dagger gleamed in the otherworldly light emanating from the standing stones, and she could feel power building around her like a gathering storm. But as she raised the blade to make the required cuts, a new voice spoke from the edge of the clearing. "Stop, sister. There's no need for this suffering to continue." She turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows between the trees, tall, regal, and immediately recognizable despite the supernatural pallor of undeath. Queen Lyralii Nightbane, their mother, walked into the clearing with the same graceful bearing she had possessed in life. Her royal gown, once a magnificent creation of silk and gold, now hung in tattered remnants around her corrupted form. "Mother," Zephyria breathed, her hand trembling as she struggled to maintain her grip on the ceremonial dagger. The sight of Queen Lyralii, who had died peacefully in her sleep just 2 years prior, standing among the undead horrors was perhaps the cruelest blow yet. "You're hurting yourself unnecessarily, my dear child," the creature wearing her mother's face said in a voice that was almost perfect mimicry of the queen's warm tones. "This ritual will demand everything from you, your life, your soul, your very essence. And for what? To save a kingdom that is already lost?" Captain Thaddeus, even while fighting for his life against 3 undead knights, shouted a warning, "Don't listen to it, Your Highness. That thing isn't your mother. Your mother would never ask you to abandon your people." But the words cut deep nonetheless, because they contained a terrible truth. The ancient texts had been unclear about the exact price of the ritual, speaking only of costs beyond measure and sacrifices that echo through eternity. As power continued to build around the standing stones, Zephyria could feel something vital being drawn from her very soul, a price that would leave her fundamentally changed even if she survived. "Join us willingly," the thing that wore her mother's face continued, "and you can be with your family again. Draken is waiting for you. I am waiting for you. We can rule together in eternal darkness, and there will be no more pain, no more difficult choices, no more burden of responsibility." The offer was tempting in ways that terrified her. To surrender, to stop fighting, to end the crushing weight of responsibility that had defined her entire life, it would be so easy to simply lay down Soulrend and accept the darkness. Instead, she raised the ceremonial dagger and drew it across her palm, letting her royal blood fall upon the altar stone. The standing stones blazed with brilliant silver light, and the creature wearing her mother's face shrieked in rage and pain as it was forced to retreat into the shadows. "I choose to fight," Zephyria declared, her voice carrying across the clearing with supernatural resonance. "I choose to save them, no matter the cost." The ritual entered its final phase, and the very fabric of reality began to bend around the ancient circle. The silver light that erupted from the ritual circle was unlike anything the world had seen since the Age of Legends. It blazed upward like a pillar of pure starfire, piercing the darkened sky and sending ripples of power across the entire continent. Princess Zephyria stood at its center, her body wreathed in energies that made her appear more spirit than flesh, her violet eyes now burning with the collected wisdom and power of every monarch who had ever ruled Valehorn. The effect on the undead creatures was immediate and devastating. Those closest to the circle simply disintegrated, their corrupted forms unable to withstand the purifying energy that now flowed from the ancient stones. Others, farther away, stopped their advance and began to wail in voices that carried both pain and something that might have been relief. The dark magic that had bound them to their cursed existence was being systematically unraveled by the royal bloodline's ultimate sacrifice. Captain Thaddeus lowered his warhammer, staring in awe as the creatures that had been trying to kill him moments before simply crumbled to dust. "By all the old gods," he whispered, "she's actually doing it. She's breaking the curse." But even as victory seemed within reach, Zephyria could feel the terrible price being extracted from her very essence. The ritual was consuming not just her blood, but her life force itself, drawing upon the accumulated power of generations to fuel its working. She could feel herself becoming translucent, less solid with each passing moment, as if she were fading from the physical world entirely. Through the blazing light, she saw the remaining members of her strike force watching her with expressions of mingled triumph and grief. They understood what was happening. Their princess was saving the kingdom, but she would not survive to see the world she was creating. The ancient magic demanded nothing less than everything she had to give. "The light is spreading," Sir Braylon called out, pointing toward the horizon. Indeed, waves of silver radiance were rippling outward from the ritual circle like rings on a pond, washing over the landscape and cleansing it of corruption. In the distance, they could see similar pillars of light beginning to rise from other ancient sites throughout the kingdom as the network of ritual circles activated in response to Zephyria's sacrifice. The princess felt a presence beside her and turned to see a figure materializing in the light, not the corrupted version that had tried to tempt her, but her mother as she truly was, radiant and whole. Queen Lyralii smiled with infinite love and pride as she placed a ghostly hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You have exceeded every hope I ever had for you," the queen's spirit said, her voice carrying the warmth of summer rain. "The kingdom will remember your sacrifice, and the light you kindle today will burn away the darkness forever." "Will it hurt?" Zephyria asked, suddenly feeling very young despite all her royal training and warrior's experience. "When it's over, will it hurt?" "No, my brave daughter. You will simply step from one form of service into another. The kings and queens who came before are waiting to welcome you, and together we will watch over the realm in ways the living cannot imagine." Through the blazing radiance, Zephyria could see the whispering woods beginning to change. The twisted, corrupted trees were straightening, their bark healing from black rot to healthy brown. Flowers were beginning to bloom in clearings where no life had flourished for months, and she could hear the distant songs of birds returning to roost in branches that had known only death. The wave of purification reached Valehorn Castle, and she felt Sir Calitha's triumph as the undead creatures besieging the walls simply collapsed into dust. The brave master-at-arms would live to see the dawn of a new age, as would all the defenders who had held the walls with such courage. They would rebuild, they would prosper, and they would remember. "Captain Thaddeus," she called out, her voice already becoming ethereal as the ritual neared completion. "Tell them that their princess loved them. Tell them that every life saved was worth the price paid." The grizzled captain saluted her one final time, tears streaming down his weathered face. "It will be done, Your Highness. Your sacrifice will never be forgotten." As the silver light reached its crescendo, Princess Zephyria Nightbane felt herself dissolving into pure energy, her consciousness expanding to encompass the entire kingdom and beyond. She could sense every corner of the realm being cleansed, every corrupted creature being granted the peace of true death, every shadow being burned away by the light of royal sacrifice. In her final moments of individual awareness, she thought of Prince Draken and felt his spirit joining hers, whole and clean and proud of what his sister had accomplished. Together, they would watch over the kingdom they had loved, guardian spirits ensuring that such darkness could never rise again. The ritual circle fell silent, its work complete. Where Princess Zephyria had stood, only a small pile of silver dust remained, glittering with its own inner light. Captain Thaddeus carefully gathered it into a silk pouch, knowing that it would be interred with all the honor due to the greatest ruler Valehorn had ever known. The kingdom was saved, the curse was broken, and the light that had banished the darkness would burn eternal in the hearts of all who remembered the princess who gave everything so that others might live. In the years to come, bards would sing of her sacrifice, and children would be named in her honor, but none would ever fully comprehend the magnitude of what she had given up to secure their future. The age of the undead was over. The age of hope had begun.